Hi, I am Jacob Schlossel, and here's my 9/11 interview. My first question I'd like to ask is, what is your full name,
Jeffrey Schlussel,
and where are you from?
Huntington Woods, Michigan.
And how old were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was 32.
My first question relates to life before the event. What do you recall about life before 9/11, such as traveling by plane or like terrorists?
Things in America before 9/11 were less secure. Security was not a prime concern for most people. Even though there had been isolated terrorist events, there was nothing on like the scale of the attacks that took place on September 11th. So airports were less secure. I don't think people felt threatened by terrorism for the most part.
And were you ever scared about being attacked, you personally, by terrorists before 9/11?
Here in America, no, but having spent time in Israel, yes.
Um, why was that?
Because in Israel, they were very familiar with acts of terrorism that happened on a somewhat frequent basis. And so they took security very seriously. And you were taught when you were there to be always on the lookout and concerned.
And now we'll go to the day of the event. How did you find out about the attacks, and what were you doing at the time?
I was working downtown Detroit, and I was at my desk doing work, and I got a call from my wife, your mother, Amy, right immediately after the first plane struck the tower. And she called me and said, a plane hit the World Trade Center. They think it was a small commuter plane. And that was the extent of our conversation. And then I believe I had on my computer, I was checking the news sites, and I might have even been, I think at that time I was even watching one of the shows live through my computer and saw the second plane hit.
And what were your first feelings when you heard about the attacks?
Complete shock, I think. A bit of fear. As the day unfolded, especially the first hour and a half or so, there was a lot of unknowns because they were reporting multiple potential hijacked airlines. And, we heard about the one striking the Capitol, and then you finally heard about the one in the field in Pennsylvania, and they were even saying there may be car bombs and things. So no one really knew what was going on. There's a lot of fear.
Were you afraid of your safety or like our family's safety, and what did you do about that?
No, I really wasn't at the time. I think here in Michigan we felt pretty secure. I didn't know of anyone traveling that day. Had I known that someone was on a plane, I obviously would have been very scared. But my immediate family, I was not concerned at that point.
What was your most vivid memory of that day?
Probably I was at that point after the second plane hit the World Trade Center. A group of us went into a conference room in our office to watch on TV. There may have been 15, 20 attorneys just watching a TV, and we were all standing around quietly and watching the two towers fall within that 20 or 25-minute span was probably the most vivid memory.
You have told me that you had documents in the World Trade Center, and what happened to your documents?
So let me give you some background. I was working on a transaction where clients of ours were buying buildings in the Detroit area, but the attorneys for the sellers were in New York, and as it turns out, their offices were in the World Trade Center. And our closing was scheduled to take place that day, September 11th. So all the documents were signed in advance and overnighted to the attorney's office. And what was going to happen that day is money was going to be funded, and then the documents will be released, and you have a closing. But when the towers fell, I got a call from the client who reminded me that the attorney who we were dealing with, his offices were in the World Trade Center. And so we knew the closing wasn't going to happen that day as we felt all the documents were destroyed. And as it turns out, I got a call the next day from that attorney who said, yeah, obviously everything was gone. He was luckily safe. His office was on one of the lower floors of the building, of one of the towers, so he was able to get out safely. But they lost everything, and it took us another number of weeks to reconstruct everything to close.
Last question about the day and like after, right after that. What do you remember about America and its leaders coming together in the following days after September 11th?
I think in general there was shock and across the country, and I think everyone, no matter what political party or affiliation or race or ethnicity you had, people did come together knowing that America, was attacked. Um, and so I think, people felt a sense of duty and loyalty to the country, and gave our leadership uh, a lot of support and um, in their actions.
Now I move to the present day. What do you believe is our nation's greatest security threat?
I still think it's terrorism, but I don't know if it'll ever be on the scale of a 9/11. It could be, hopefully not, but I think these lone wolf and smaller isolated incidents are very frightening.
What lessons do you think should be learned from September 11th, 2001?
That even in the United States, where we often think we are impenetrable and we have a strong country, that we are always vulnerable. So all people are potentially vulnerable to an attack or any other type of tragedy.
And how did 9/11 change you?
I think your mother was pregnant at the time, and it made us reflect with you. You were in her stomach, and it gave us some real concern about bringing a child into a world like that. And I think we still feel that way about, how vulnerable we all are at any given time, and to appreciate things because of that.
I would like to thank you for your time and your thoughts.
Boom.